somebody put the story around that I criticised Obama. I didn't think I had, to be honest with you, but anyway, I apparently did, and lost 1/3 of the students. That very next day, or that very night, I think it was, there were, that'd be the following night after the supposed criticism, there were 25 people in class, and I know that 11, these two very nice people here and a few other people were sick or had to be out of state or something. So where was the third of the class that dropped out? That was ridiculous. I mean, 25 plus 11 that I could, who had contacted me, that's 36. And the highest number we've had is 41. So ridiculous.
If you praised him, you'd lose all the class.
Yeah, exactly. That's something like Dr. Bonnet said. I don't mind if I did lose 1/3 of the class. To be honest
Just don't
with you.
criticize Canada, right?
No.
I'll have you
Very
know,
sensitive here.
I'll have you know I'm part Canadian.
Oh, yeah.
All my 3 postgraduate philosophy degrees are Canadian.
We forgive you. We forgive you.
You forgive me. You remember, I got 2 allies here. Well, I may have to, I'm not sure if to do about glasses yet because I had an accident during the week, bad fall, and I broke my glasses, so I'm using a couple of L.Ph. These cost me $1.50.
They usually work really well.
But do, that's my optometrist, he said, they're almost perfect, he said. Well, we better get started, I suppose. Oh, yes. Would you mind looking after the folder?
The red button.
Yeah, the red button, that's all. Thank you.
What did you say?
Wait till, just a minute. Oh. Is everybody signed in? Don't forget to sign in, please. Before we start, I do want to say thank you for those people that keeps sending money to Sister or me. I got one donation, I don't know why it happened. When it came, $100 bill. I thought, what's going on there? It's from a lady who's in the Catholic Central Union of America and Scholars for Social Justice, and she has a little ranch down there which she leases out, and she's not bad either. Anyway, so I wonder what they actually put a check in there for. So I have to phone Mrs. Dorothy Hesse. She goes out walking of a night with a shotgun under one arm and 2 dogs with her. When she sees rattlesnakes, she just goes pow, she told me. She must be a very good shooter. All right, don't forget, please, everybody sign in if you will. There may be a future with the signing in. I'm not sure what we can do yet, but I've got something in my mind Dr. Bonnet and I were talking over. But make sure you've signed in every night, won't you? So what we're dealing with is a number of things. Before we go on, I want to remind particularly those people who studied metaphysics with us last semester. Potency and act. Potency and act is the key. You could write, I once said to a class, said that if you wanted to write the whole of philosophy on the back of a postage stamp, write potency and act. When the final exam came up, there were about 70 people in that class. 5 young men, they were nurses by the way, 5 young men and the rest were women. And the young men handed me a stamp with potency and act written on it. They said, we should get an A for that. I said, no, you're just too cheap. It was only a 1-cent stamp. So that's the big thing. We're going to come tonight to one of the greatest problems facing mankind in philosophy, and it applies to everything else too. So we'll come to that in a minute, but first let me say, don't forget this too. Now, potency and act, the sight, power of sight, which is a power of the human soul, and the intellect is a power also in the human soul, what we call an operative power. They're potencies. I can think, now I do think. It was very funny when I was defending my doctoral thesis, which I defended, my thesis was written in English. You have that right in Canadian universities to use either French or English. And I was advised to write it in English. I defended it in French because all the professors who were facing me, the 5 professors, a jury, it's a rather enervating situation. You've got a big auditorium there filled with students and faculty, and you've got the press. What you say is reported next couple of days in the press. And one of the professors, Professor Cauchy, who became the president of the World's Association of Philosophers, French professor, criticized my English because I said can do is moved to does do. Can be goes to does be. He'd never heard that before. He taught for 16 years in the United States, he said, and never heard that kind of English. But that's the power of the language. Goes from can see to does see. It's interesting, incidentally, that Father Regis, who was one of my directors, I had the unusual privilege of having 2 directors of research for the thesis. He criticized Cauchy, and he said, you must distinguish between English and American. Because, he made a remark like that. And I said to him, when my time came to answer him, I said, I wrote my thesis in standard English, not American. I had to have a dig back at him somehow, that was it. So, but one of the nuns who was in my class, she was working on her doctorate also. She had a string of degrees like I've never seen. And she said to my wife, who was sitting next to her at the time, she said, good Lord, I teach that in French too. She said, that's standard French. Why did Monsieur Cauchy, who became the president of the World Association of Philosophers, why did man say such a silly thing? It was interesting too. One man we didn't know, I can't even think of his name now. And Elaine said to another man who was a friend, who was a professor there, said, which one is Monsieur, whatever his name was? He said, he's the man that'll talk like this all the way through, and he did too. He got into a real argument with the other faculty, and the dean signalled to me, keep out of it, let them fight it out. Anyway, that's beside the point. But the University of Montreal then had one of the finest faculties in the world. And they had 3 or 4 great names known all over the world. Regis was one, and my friend Father Geiger was another. He was from Europe, but he came as a part-time teacher there. So potency and act. Can think goes to does think. We're going to see. No potency can actualize itself. Sight goes from can see to does see, and it needs light to move it over. And we'll see the tremendous effect of that in history when it comes to the right time, when we're studying the intellect and its operations, the human mind. So, by the way, the gentleman who said St. Thomas said the intellect and the soul are the same, he's not here, is he? No, can't quite remember what he looked like. I want to see what he thought was that, because sometimes translations can lead you a bit astray. Now, with Vernon Burke, a lovely, wonderful scholar who died just a few years ago, he translated a whole lot of stuff, and I had to translate that for his students. He'd write being instead of be, meaning is. When something does be or something is, he'd translate it as being, and it was nonsensical. However, we won't go into that. Then the other thing is the first thing, potency and act. Distinguish that always. You'll see it in application as we go along. It's one of the great theses that modern philosophy just doesn't understand. The other one was immanent. The operations of living things are immanent acts. The highest immanence is the intellect, understanding itself. The highest possible immanence rather. And we'll see the ultimate degree of immanence is the divine intellection. We'll talk about that later. So keep those 2 things in mind, potency and act. It has a potency for seeing. It is power. We often say, I got the power of sight. Well, that's it. Potency is the more technical term because it covers more broader things. So we saw, don't forget, the proof that there is a soul. I needed some righties. So, remember this. We saw this before. Do follows be. Is that visible to everybody? Anybody finding difficulty with that? Yes, that's what I thought. I'll try one of these. Now, in other words, everything does according to its nature. A dog be's a dog, therefore it'll do like a dog. Something will be a tree, therefore it'll do like a tree. So do follows be, and the mode of doing follows the mode of being. That's a principle we're going to use a lot. Do follows be. Everything operates according to its nature. Chemistry depends upon that. When you analyze something, you find out what it can do. Now you know what it is from past experience, because it's operating and manifests its own nature. Well, we find there are two kinds of do's, imminent and transitive. Therefore, there are two kinds of be's. One which does imminent act, called living, and the other, transitive, which is non-living. Remember, the philosophical act is to judge facts in the light of principles of reason. There's the principle of reason. Here's the fact. There are two different kinds of do's, and here's the conclusion. There are two different kinds of beings. Things can be in two different ways. Some are living, some are non-living. Some do imminent acts. When something does imminent acts, that's when you know you've got something living. There was a great talk about crystals could be alive years ago. If you take, say, a certain kind of crystals, copper sulfate, different things, you can put a crystal in a solution of the same substance and the crystal will grow. Yes, but that's a transitive action. That's the dissolved solution, or the solution of copper sulfate is just adding to the crystal, coalescing with the crystal. But that's a transitive action, not an imminent action. For instance, here's an imminent action. I can imagine, I can know my imaginings. I do the imagining. I might fall in love with, say, Betty. Betty doesn't even know me. She hasn't caused a transitive action in me. She might have specified, she specifies the knowledge, but I have the understanding and I benefit from the understanding. The act of loving her with my will, I have that act, I do it, and I benefit from it. But she doesn't even know I exist. Yet, it might be her way of talking, her general presentation of herself, and I could fall in love with that, let's say. All she's doing is specifying. So, there's a proof that there's a soul in things. You can call it what you like. Now there are 3 degrees of immanence, as we saw. So there are 3 degrees of living. Plants, which do the action for themselves. Brute animals, which not only carry out the action for themselves, but give themselves the form of the action. And man, that gives himself not only the form and the operation, but gives himself the purpose of the act. So we saw those things. And I wanted to review them a little bit tonight. So the 3 degrees of principle of life, we saw that. Now, then we saw the operations of living organisms in general. Vegetative powers, sensitive knowledge, or sensitive powers, if you like, intellective powers, appetites, locomotive power. We'll be dealing with each of these, not so much the locomotive power, but notice what I've said here. Acts, habits, and powers are specified by their formal objects. All the acts are specified or put into the species of things by what is thrown up in front of them, the object. Remember object? Did I explain that before, the meaning of the word? Don't remember what I did. I'll do it again anyway. Ob always means sort of in front of. This is an obstruction here. Somebody raised their hand. I object. Iacere in Latin means to throw. We've got the English word javelin. When you're throwing a spear in sports, in the Olympics, etc., the javelin, throwing that, comes from that. There's no J in Latin, but this is iacere. We spell it like that. Ob means in front of. So what is the object of the power? That's how we know the nature of the power, by what its object is. You must take into account. When two things are related, you must take into account what the relationship is between them. So we'll see more of that. Often some of these things you might say, that's strange, I've never heard that sort of talk before. But it's when we progress a bit and you look back on it, you start to see a lot more in it. We saw the vegetative powers. Substance, nutrition has as its object, what's subjected to it, as substance, replace, repairs, etc. Growth gives the due perfection of the individual. Reproduction, new member of the species. So we saw that. Try and not get caught up in side issues. Now I've given you there 3 teachings in ethics about pleasure. I gave you those 3. But don't get caught up in that, that's a side issue. See the main things. Vegetative powers, exactly how each one is determined by its object. So, remember, a snake eating squirrel never becomes a squirrel. But by heaven, I wish the squirrels around my place would leave my pear tree alone and become a pear. The trouble is I don't want 2 of them there, so why would I want a pear? Sorry about that. I had to say on one occasion amongst a scholarly meeting somewhere, I don't know where it was now, I said something about, I might have told you this, they were talking about parental authority, and I said, although it's not apparent that I'm not a parent, nevertheless, took a second or 2 for some of them to wake up. You could laugh now. But growth, we saw the doctrine of the natural minimum and the natural maximum, the variability in living things, and the fixation amongst non-living things. We saw the distinction between vital generation and non-vital. Therein lies a beautiful example of immanence. It's immanent to the species amongst living things. So then, my friends, every being wants to diffuse its own good. That is why Freud, who misunderstood, Freud had a basic teaching on metaphysics. Everything inclines towards non-existence. Nihilism. Nihil, N-I-H-I-L, in Latin means nothing. A tendency towards nothing. Taught a filthy doctrine, as Woodbury once called it. Every male wants to have sexual intercourse with his own mother. They go back to the womb where he came from, into nothing. That was the doctrine of Freud. Well, it is true that it is a tremendous urge to eat food and to reproduce, even to growing. These fundamental powers have an extraordinary effect on us. So it is aimed towards perfecting first the individual with growth, secondly with perfecting the species with reproduction. Now we come to that great thesis, knowledge in general. And if you want to understand a philosopher, look quickly to see what he says about knowledge. Try and see that. The English philosophers who've misguided, first the French philosopher Descartes, misguided the Western world, then followed by Kant, and the English philosophers, and David Hume particularly misguided Kant. They all went wrong, and we'll see as we go along where they went wrong. So knowledge is one of the great mysteries of philosophy. There are 3 great problems in philosophy, the 3 principal problems. I promised myself for years to write an article on this, and I haven't done it yet. First, the nature of the universal. People will say, oh, you're generalizing when you say man is this, man is that. That's drawing the universal. Generalizing in people's behavior, oh, most people think this and most people think that. I'd bowl students out. I was teaching ethics to, this was a French group at Ottawa, and Monsieur, said a lad one day, he said, most of the students in the class don't agree with a lot of what you're teaching. What do you think? They were thinking about sex, of course. Anyway, I said to him, oh, made a, what we call it?
Poll?
Survey. Yeah, you've made a poll or a survey, he said. Oh, no, he said, sat down, embarrassed himself. So we've got to be very careful of saying most people think this, most people think that. Be careful. Somebody will say, have you taken a poll or have you made a survey? You don't know what most people think. St. Thomas never ever said anything like that. He always said some. Some will teach this, some will teach that. So knowledge in general. So the first thing is the universal. And very quickly, as young children, we know the difference between a horse and a man. We know the horse is not and man are just two species of the same genus. We know that. But we can know the nature of the universal. If we can't know the universal, then we can't know the natures of anything. And if we can't, we cannot distinguish man from a brute. Now, so the first big problem is the nature of the universal. Then that's explained by the nature of knowledge. And Aristotle and St. Thomas were the great geniuses that guided us on this. Then that is reduced to potency and act. The explanation of the universal is found in the nature of knowledge. Nature of knowledge is found in potency and act. Knowledge is a very peculiar thing, and I remember about 105 years ago when I was a student studying under Woodbury, he said this when we started knowledge. Now we're going to go through a great tunnel. A great tunnel. There'll be darkness all around it, and we'll be trying to fathom it out. Then we'll see a light at the end of the tunnel. Then it'll spring into our minds and we'll see the solution to it all. But listen to some of the problems we face now. Knowledge is in me, and yet it is about something outside of me. How does that happen? This is all modern philosophy is sunk in this. One professor at St. Louis, Missouri, one of my ex-students who was a faculty wife, incidentally, of mathematics, and she had a bright mathematical mind herself and was a very excellent violinist too, I might add. She was in the class at Missouri, St. Louis University, and she heard the professor say something about the theory of knowledge, say something about St. Thomas taught this. Excuse me, Professor, I can't see that he taught that, she said, but what I've been taught says that's wrong. Oh, is that right, he said? So she went up to the board and showed him what was right. He didn't know that before. Look at the proofs of the existence of God. What's his name? I thought of it just before I came here for some reason. Can't think of his name. He's been, like all the books that I've got, the anthologies, that's to say, these books being printed all the time, they send some of them to the faculty and you look over them and you say, same old stuff. And in there, when it came to the existence of God, they all seem to want to focus on the existence of God. Philosophers today are teaching ethics and all sorts of things just by focusing on ethics. They don't do any groundwork like we're doing. There's focus on ethics. You can see the books they're using. A book of modern philosophy. Sounds great, but it's just a little bit of this, a little bit of that. There's one book buyer, they go around buying these books from faculty, and he said to me, they're all writing the same thing. Oh, this bit is out of Kant, that bit is out of somebody else. But this philosopher was an atheist, and he read in a number of places what, for instance, St. Thomas said about the existence of God. And what happened? It was most unconvincing. If I had come to that first, it certainly would not convince me. It was so badly presented. But in St. Thomas's time, even if you read his words, in his time, the proofs were so well known, they just had to dash off a few concepts. All the concepts are there. You just had to throw them out. And the philosophers had such good minds, they knew exactly what he meant. But the modern mind, most even professors, have no idea. I presented, as you know, a paper in the Academy of Sciences recently, and in that there I mentioned about something. My paper was to be a response to the Pope's recent speech to educators, and in that I drew attention to a certain professor we had in Ottawa. He got me between classes one day. He said to me, "Listen, am I teaching the theory of knowledge correct?" He said, "Listen." I said, "Well, what are you doing, Don?" He said, "Well, listen." He told me, I said, "I say this, I say that," and I said, "You're teaching Kant. You're not teaching the theory of knowledge correctly." He was 6 years in the University of Louvain.
Oh.
He said he sat for one exam the whole time he was there. They didn't give them exams. Shoddy, second rate. That was a great university at one time. But poor Don didn't know what the heck he was doing. He said, I started to explain. "Oh, don't go into too much detail, I'm already confused," he said to me. "It's between two classes." This is in a university which was very, very reputable at the time. I don't know what it's like now, but all I know is when I was studying at Montreal, some of my classmates who demonstrated nothing but dumbness, they're now professors in the University of Montreal. Claude Lagadec. Claude said, "I can't see how you can prove there's a God." This is over lunch one day. How there's a God from something that's material. I don't see how it's possible. André Dupont was an engineer who came back to study philosophy. He said, "Oh, it's impossible." They had no idea. We'll see. So, my friends, first we face the problem. Knowledge is in me, and yet it's about something outside of me. How does that happen? How does that big tree get into my mind, etc.? It's 100 feet tall, but it's in me. How? Note these expressions. I had you in mind yesterday. You were in my mind yesterday. Get this out of your mind. Or get this into your mind. Or this expression. That slipped out of my mind. Can you imagine this tree? The two terms of the problem in the theory of knowledge, and whenever you're studying a problem, you've always got to remember there are two terms. It's a funny expression that we say in Australia, "Where's the bus terminus?" Here you'll say, "Where's the bus terminal?" That's an adjective. The noun is terminus. So get used to the term. It means two stopping places. The knowledge is in the knower versus the known is outside the knower. That's the problem. Knowledge is in the knower, yet it's about something outside. It goes as far as this, the errors. Hegel said, there's nothing outside, it's all in the mind. Others said, there's nothing in here, it's all out there. So, the problem is to reconcile the activity of the knower with the activity of the known. And my first epistemology exam, which was oral, with Father Regis, he jumped. How can the known be active? Difference of how you have to be careful understanding each other's terms. Woodbury always taught you have to reconcile the activity of the knower with the activity of the known. Regis always never spoke about the activity of the known. I said we use that term to signify specification. The species of knowledge comes from the known. What am I looking at? A man? Now I'm looking at a horse. That comes from the known. The known specifies. That's its activity. And properly speaking, it is an activity. So the solution is, little b, you'll find this. There are two ways of having a form. Now, non-knowers, trees, rocks, water, non-knowers have the form of the known physically. What makes a tree be a tree? Its form. Well, the tree has it physically and makes it grow up into a big thing with branches and leaves. But when I have that 100-foot tree in my mind or my imagination, I don't grow 100 foot. I don't put branches out and leaves. So there are two ways of having form. The way a known or non-knower has it, and the way the knower has it. Two ways of having form. So I always forget something. So what we've got to do now is to find the characteristics of those two ways of having form. What are the characteristics of a non-knower having form? Let me use an extreme example. Let's suppose there's a stove. It has the form of heat, maybe 500 degrees. Well, I've got the form of 500 degrees in my mind now. Doesn't affect me. But if it's sat on the stove and I got a hot seat, boy, that would affect me. I then know what heat is to have heat physically. But you can have 1,000 degrees. My dad, electrical contractor, had to do a lot of industrial work, etc. Went to the can't think of their names. Anyway, it was a manufacturer of stoves, and I saw a man with front piece and heavy gear on open one of the blast furnaces one day. I've never forgotten. I went with him one day. He used to love taking me to one of these places, and I had a lot of experience inside factories. I even worked, for a bit of fun, worked with the men in a few places, like wheels, manufacturing wheels, things like that. But they opened this blast furnace, and I was about 100 feet back. I felt the blast of the heat. I don't know how many 1,000 degrees it was, but they were melting metal, iron, and making iron stoves. And I felt the blast of that. How would I feel it if I was pushed into the oven? You'd frizzle up in a minute. Yet I've got that, let's say it's 2,000 degrees centigrade or something like that. I've got that in mind now, but I don't frizzle up. Anytime, if you give somebody a hot foot, give them a match in their shoe or something, they then know what it is to have heat physically. So there are two ways of having form. So here's a non-knower. Has the form physically. It physically becomes hot. It has the form compositively. It forms a compound. In other words, heat in water, it always forms a compound with the water. And the heat belongs to the water. So we'll call that subjectively. I'm trying to see if I've got the right order, so I don't like to confuse your notes. Sometimes you put them in the notes, you might put them in a different order. Perhaps subjectively should come first. So you've got this, the non-knower. Physically, the coffee becomes hot. Compositively, you don't just have heat, or you don't just have water, you have hot water, compound. Subjectively, the heat now belongs to the water. Now a knower, by the way, you look at Hobbes, you look at Locke, Berkeley, Hume, Hegel, Kant. Look at all the philosophers. None of this appears in their work. None of it. This has it supraphysically. The knower has the heat supraphysically, above the physical order. It has it incompositively. It doesn't form a compound. And it doesn't have it subjectively, but objectively. There are two distinct ways of having form. Strangely enough, I've got a lot of what they call manuals, books written by professors for student classroom. Good, reputable, solid books. But they don't have all these three in them. I don't find them anywhere except Woodbury. You might find, they might say naturally. One has it above the natural order and one doesn't, which means physically. The word physical and the word natural are the same word. One's Latin, one's Greek. So, there we are. So the non-knower has the form physically. The tree has the form of tree physically. So it becomes physically a tree. But knowers have the form supraphysically. I don't become a tree physically with branches and leaves. So there we are. Now that union of knower and known, as Woodbury says, it's unique, absolutely one in the knower. The union of knower and known. It's the greatest union you could have apart from the union which exists in God. Non-knowers form thirds. Knowers do not. Through knowledge we become the known, but in a higher way, for we are not limited to being that particular thing known. So Thomas writes a beautiful passage. He says that non-knowers are limited to having their own being. What gives them their being? The form. But a knower has a more perfect form. It can have its own form physically, or be its own form physically, or have its own form physically, I'd better say, I suppose. But at the same time, it can make up for the limitation of its being by possessing the being of other things. What makes a tree be a tree? The form. What makes a dog be a dog? The form, the substantial form. And we can be in possession of those, but in a higher way that doesn't limit us. We're completely delimited. I can have today the form of pear tree. When Bill and I were picking pears up, how were they, Bill? All right? So pick up pears. I can have the form of pear tree. Then I can turn and have the form of a squirrel, have the form of a book, have the form of somebody else's ideas even, by having a chat with them. So we're not limited to being just merely our own form. We can have the whole vast universe of forms through knowledge. I once working on this in the classroom, and a girl, I think she was 18 years of age, wrote a beautiful poem and presented it to me before I left Ottawa. It's memory of me, she wrote it. She said, "I once was a whale and travelled the seas afar." I can't remember it. "I once was an eagle and I soared over mountains and trees. I once was this, I once was that." It was absolutely beautiful. She was gifted in writing poetry. We've got it at home somewhere. So we have the form of other things in a higher way. Our own form is higher than the form of a non-living thing. Knowers have a more perfect form. Look at a dog. He can have even smell. Dogs have got a tremendously effective sense of smell. Possesses the form of what is smellable, if you like. I can become through knowledge a flower, rosebush, elephant, mountain, ocean, lion, and so on. Because I'm possessing that form. What makes the lion be a lion is the form of lion. Well, I possess that form through knowledge. But it's a more perfect way because it doesn't limit me to being just that form.
Just a point that what this explanation of knowledge, and that it really drives home the real distinction between matter and form.
Oh yes, there's no doubt about that. It drives it home, as you said. The well-chosen words. Yes. Yep. No limitation. To have the form of something is to be that thing in a knowledge way. So, thus, to know is to have the form of another thing, but as it is still the form of another. The known doesn't lose anything. I've written these very important words in there for you. To know is to have the form of another thing, but as it is still the form of another. The knower shares in the being of others. In other words, we can participate in the whole world of beings through knowledge. The littlest child through knowledge. Even in the womb, the first concept is formed. A little child knows the distinction between something and nothing. Something and nothing. If you've seen what is it? The film by Bernard Nathanson,
Silent Scream.
Silent Scream. Thank you. By the way, his wife is one of the most beautiful women I've ever met. She asked me to take her home one night, and another fella jumped in and took her home. I was still mad at him. Anyway, Adele was a lovely person, but he showed the film, and you can see the child trying to get away from the needle, and the child sort of bouncing around, but always trying to get away. So the first concept, the most elementary and primordial concept we can have, is a distinction between something, nothing. Something, nothing. The child knows that. So this union of knower and known is a higher form of union. Remember, we make up for our limitations. Knowers have a more perfect form, for they can have the form of another in a non-physical way, as well as their own form, which they have physically. The form in the tree is possessed by one thing only, the tree. But the tree's form in knowledge can be received by many knowers at the same time. 1,000 people can look at a tree, and the tree loses nothing. That's an interesting fact, and you don't find that in books. That 10,000 people can look at something, and it doesn't affect the thing. There was some kind of a joke when we were kids about that. Don't look at my book, you'll wear it out. Just looking at things. Or don't look at my picture, you're wearing it out. Well, 1,000 people could look at it and it doesn't affect it at all. I had fish down the basement the other night, just irritating my mouth. If I blubber a bit, you'll know why. But notice this. There are chemical changes which go with the acts of the power in the organs. The organs are the instrument of the powers. And for instance, the eye specialists in studying the physiology, psychophysiology of the eye, the sight, they tell us every time we see something there are 200 changes made in the body, the psychophysical organism. Approximately 200 chemico-physical changes which take place within us. We will see this in other psychological changes. For example, when we are angry, we can go red in the face, or pale when something's happening that we're scared of. So D, little d, the act of knowledge. The act is an immanent act which comes from the knower and ends within the knower, the do, the very do. But the specification comes from the known. In other words, what kind of knowledge, pardon me, the form of the act of knowing comes from the known. The whole of it comes from the known. Let me put it this way. Let me draw a picture here. Who am I drawing? I'm not sure. I think I'd leave that one alone. The whole of what is on the board comes from the artist. But the whole of how it's known comes from the pen. The pen doesn't have that in it. The artist has it in him. The whole of what is known is from the artist, from his concept. But how it is known comes from the pen. Likewise, in knowledge, the whole of what is known comes from the tree, let's say. The whole of how it is known comes from the knower. So it may be sense knowledge, imagination, intellect, etc. All of that comes from the knower. But as regards the species of knowledge, of what specifies the knowledge, is the object out there. We call that reconciling the execution of the act and the specification. Pardon me. The whole of what is known comes from the knower. The tree fixes what is known. It is active by specifying the knowledge, determining the knowledge. I've found students not always able to, can't always see that clock up there, not always able to to understand that. And I'll say, I'm trying my best to see a giraffe sitting in front of me. I'm utterly enslaved to this. This is a man. I want to see that, but my sight is utterly specified from the knower. Please remember that. It's very important. So the act of knowledge is to become the other non-physically. Now, little e, the intentionality of knowledge. That word intention, tendere in Latin means to stretch, stretch towards. In prepositions in Latin come, you see, there's some that here and some that are in here. If it takes the objective case after it, then it's going towards. If it takes the ablative case, it's within it, etc. We needn't go into that too much, but then ad or in means going towards. Ab means coming out of, or ex, coming out of. Then others, in can be within the thing. So the Latin prepositions are very specific, yet still fairly broad. Woodbury once described, he was a perfect Latinist, by the way, absolutely magnificent. He could give you the origin of terms way back. He said that Latin was too restrictive. That's the trouble, it was too exact. And there's a big advantage when you're teaching philosophy, believe me, if you're teaching in Latin. I also found that pretty well with French too. I found it, teaching logic in French, I found it was sometimes very useful to have it for the students who were French speaking, or if you're in a French, University of Montreal, we had, University of Ottawa, we had two distinct, not departments, but types of courses in the universities. Those given in French, those given in English. However, intentionality, it means stretching towards the thing. Now that's a mystery that a lot of people don't understand. That knowledge is a stretching towards the thing. The intentionality of knowledge. We know that. What did you intend when you did this? What did you intend? What were you stretching towards? So we know that term intention, used for instance in the law courts. What was the intention, your intention when you rode off on this bike, etc., etc.? We call the form of the known in the knower is called the species. And the species, that word species, by the way, in Latin means the look of something. The look of something. Speculum in Latin means a mirror, what you're looking at. And we know a species from the way the thing looks. You saw out there, you saw something, and you saw the shape of something, and you say, well, I know what that is. It's a kangaroo. By the look of it. Genus is another word. That's a different word. That's different kinds. Genus requires intellect, but species will require vision. Big difference between the two. Genus is an intellectual relationship between things. You remember I showed you, and I don't know whether I actually finished that. I remember saying it the other night. T, G, M, N, O. I'm sorry. B, D, G, M, N. Lips only. Lips and voice. B, D, G. Lips, voice, and lips. What am I saying?
Nasal.
Nasal. And nasal, yeah. I went blank on it all of a sudden. Thank you. M, N, Pretty good, man. Say that 3 times quickly. Pretty good, man. Northern Europe will have up here. Southern Europe will have it down here. For instance, genus. And what am I doing? Yeah, you send it up there. And the k will come down here. K. So when you say genus, that's the same word as kind. Oh, there it is what I've done. I wonder what the dickens was wrong here. That's wrong, sorry. Putike. Putike, butige, munenje. Well, up here, you'll have, yes, down, I've reversed everything there. Forgive me for that. Try it again. We'll find the word kind up here. And down here we'll find the word genus. So, Northern Europe, Southern Europe. Genus. Genus, as the Greeks would say. So, the intentionality of knowledge means this, that we get the species of knowledge from the object. The species of knowledge from the object. This, my friend, Sam, when you first hear it, you'll say, oh, I'm finding it a little hard to get my mind around. It'll come. It's really very simple when it's analysed properly. So, it simply means our minds, our sight, etc., are stretched towards the known. This is possible because of the similitude of the known in the knower. The similitude or similar thing, similarity of it is impressed in our knowledge, our active knowledge. We go out with the thing. The thing doesn't jump into us, we go out and grasp it. The species is not what we know, but the external thing is what we know. The species is that wherein we know the thing. The species in us represents what's presented out there. That's another good way of putting it. We don't know the species. We only know that by reflection over it. We know in the species, we know the external thing. The species is that wherein we know the external thing. We do the act of knowledge because of that determination of our act by the tree, for instance. So, the external thing is what we know. The species is that wherein we know the thing. The whole of Western European philosophy went sent wrong by Descartes, and then carried up to its more logical conclusion by two lines of thinking which go out from that. We'll deal with that later. One was Locke, Berkeley and Hume, the English philosophers, and they hit the low water mark in the history of philosophy. The other was more the continental, the Germans, and Nietzsche said there was never any original philosophy in the Germans. But the continental stuff went one way and the English stuff went the other way, because the English were more practical in a way. So remember that. Descartes is a very arrogant man in many ways. He sat down and said, well, all history's gone wrong, I'll fix them, put them back in their place. They're not his exact words, but that's what he was indicating. Well, what he did is, like people who were saying that Marx wanted to put everybody back on their feet or on their head. What he really did is to put himself on his head. So Descartes made an awful blunder. He started off with a fundamental principle. What I know is the species of the known. The image, that's what I know. Then, for a long time after that, men were trying to bridge that gap. What's in me? How does I get out to it? How do I get out to the thing in itself? All I know is what's locked up in me. And actually, 3 systems of philosophy developed out of that. One is not that important. It doesn't grab people so much. One was empiricism, and the other is the immaterial philosophy. That everything is idealistic. That sort of thing. So, it's not the thing that in me as I know it. It's using that I know the external thing. Using that I know the external thing. But these philosophers show no evidence of having ever heard that. They grew up in the 17th century and 18th century with a great prejudice to whatever was in the past. Well, I think you know enough about history to know what caused a lot of that. Is that time going? Yes.
7:25.
Thank you. Now, what is the basis of knowledge? Immateriality. Immateriality is the basis of knowledge. The immateriality of the form of the things known, and the immateriality of the knower. Immateriality is the basis. Karl Marx said, I think about things because my mind is matter and so are things matter. It's just the opposite. He knew nothing about this distinction. It's just the opposite. So form is the reason why something is knowable, not matter, as Karl Marx thought. Form is why something is a knower. Is a more perfect form, enabling it to know. What makes a tree be a tree? Its form is the same as that which makes me be knowing a tree. So what makes a dog be a dog? A certain elevation above the materiality of the dog. A certain elevation above it. A form is always a certain limited immateriality above the materiality. Remember, we saw there are two separate, distinct principles in everything. Matter and form. Form makes us all be one member of the human race, one species. The soul that this gentleman has, this gentleman, this lady, and you. The form is the reason we're all one human race. But the matter divides it off to be this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. Big distinction between matter and form. The same cannot be the reason of opposites. And man and this man are opposites. So, immateriality, form, is the reason when the more excellent kind of form makes someone be a knower, and a certain form, or form above the materiality of it, makes something be knowable. We know that if there's no light shone in this room, nothing's seeable. It needs the form to be manifest in light for it to be seeable. We'll have a lot more to say about that. So form determines something to know a tree and not a dog. An excellence of form makes us be better things than an ice block, for instance. So form is a certain elevation or perfection. We saw in metaphysics that form, splendor of form, makes something be beautiful. Remember that? The integrity of parts, the due proportion, then the splendor of form makes something be beautiful. You see a more splendid form. Look at now what's going on in the trees around in the countryside here. The splendor of that beautiful form colour. You must have seen a lot of it while you're travelling. I'm sorry I missed it. But it's I see enough trees around me to see some of it, and I have seen it in the past, of course. But immateriality is the reason of knowledge. If there's no form, things are not knowable. They just all operate this way, like non-knowers, physically, compositively, and subjectively. This is so important, my friends. Every philosophy you'll see has that's worth his weight in peanuts, at least, has something on nature of knowledge. But most of them blunder, or assume a nature of knowledge. Now we'll see there are different kinds of knowledge, or degrees of knowledge. In fact, the great French philosopher Maritain, he named his books, one of his great books that he'll be remembered for many years to come, the degree of knowledge. Degrees of knowledge, rather. He called it in French to divide, to compose. Divide in order to compose. The first act of the intellect divides. The second act composes. We'll see that later. So, sense knowledge has this kind of knowledge. The object is this, that, the other. All the senses, their object is this or that. Always the singular. What I see is this colour, this colour. What I hear is this sound, that sound. Always the senses go at this or that or the other. But the intellect, it's just universal. We'll show that later, more when we come to dealing with the intellect. But the intellect shows that there are degrees of knowledge. For instance, this man, this woman, that's what the senses see. But the intellect understands man. The intellect understands the universal. Humanity, There are people who deny that. We'll see their absurdities later when we come to the intellect. I said to a student who questioned something on this, I was travelling one time, I've never forgotten it. 3 of us were travelling. There's the Blue Mountains, which run down the Great Dividing Range, the east coast of Australia. And behind that, say 60 or 70 miles west of Sydney, we're in now a country where there are sheep and wheat and all sorts of things. And I remember seeing a bridge, the most ornate bridge I've ever seen in my life, in bushland, you might say, crossing just a little creek. It was very ornate. It's a funny thing. A dentist was talking once to me about putting a bridge in somebody's mouth. You know what I'm talking about? You know what a bridge means in both cases? And then sometimes you come across an idea which bridges the gap in your knowledge. You know what I mean by a bridge? Everybody knows. And if I said, there's an animal out there, was it? What kind of animal? I've had little girls say that to me in Australia. Oh, I saw an animal out there. What kind of an animal? What did it look like? Like my next door neighbour. No. Listen now. No, his little girl came to him. He was laying a cement path or something, or adding to it or something next door. Daddy, the chookie tried to bite me. Chookie? That's child talk for a chicken in Australia. Chookie. And chicken tried one. He went on. What the heck is she talking about? He said, no chookies around here. Well, there were in our place, but not in his. Suddenly saw a movement. There's a red-bellied black snake, about 3 or 4 feet long. And you don't want to get bitten by one of them. Australia has the 5 deadliest snakes in the world. And 3 of them can be found in Sydney. Thank God 2 of them, which are very bad, are more in the sort of drier parts of Australia. And the snake had tried to bite her, to strike her. No, they don't bite, they strike poisonous snakes. But he knew he was looking for an animal of some kind. He didn't know what it was. But his mind instantly grasped that something had tried to attack her. And he had looked around, he couldn't see anything. Then suddenly, the corner of his eye saw this movement. I have a photograph somewhere of him holding up the dead snake. He killed it. But I think it's against the law in Australia to kill deadly snakes. I wouldn't be bothered by the law if I saw one. But they say the safest thing is get away. They're so quick. Get away from them. They warn you. All bus stops and train stations all have something about red-back spiders, trapdoor spiders, and snake bites, what to do. It's interesting. The latest snake bite is not to what we used to do. We were taught in first aid to wash the external poison out away and then sort of ligature the thing, put a bond on it, you see. They don't do that now. They prefer to bind the limb with something which is clothing, like you take off your undershirt and bind the limb tightly. You know how you can go and you've got over tight clothing on and the leg might swell a bit, but it'll slow down the... When you do cut the thing, you know, for instance, if I was one of you folks were struck, I'd immediately break my glasses and clarify where the puncture mark. There's always only 2 with a poisonous snake, only 2 holes. If you see a row of holes, forget it, it's all right. I wouldn't forget it. I'd kick him back. But anyway, the thing is, they now say that you only get about 1/3 of the poison out when you suck it out anyway. So the idea is to slow down the ligature. It used to be that 20 minutes you had to act, release the ligature. Otherwise the blood would congeal in the limb. But I've always wondered what happens if you get bitten on the rear end, or if you get You can imagine somebody like gets bitten and some woman rushes up and says, "Quick, take your pants off." We were taught in first aid that we were taught something about that in first aid. A butcher, chopping meat, missed the block or something and severed the femoral artery here. And 2 women said, "I wouldn't take his pants off." They let him die. That's why they brought that up. Don't be afraid. Get your pants off. Come on, I'm going to start, treating you. But the binding the limb, the blood slows down, and they got a better chance of fighting back. Anyway, the fierce snake is the deadliest in the world. Then comes the brown snake that I've seen around my own home. Then comes the taipan, which is the third. Used to think it was the second, but it's the third deadliest. And then the death adder and the tiger snake. They're vicious. I was thinking of going back to Australia one time, and Dr. Bonnet said, "There are snakes there." He wanted to keep me here. So please take a break.